Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever wondered how in the world anyone can check a billion, with a B, digital transactions for errors? Well, today, we're diving into the world of digital auditing and the incredibly powerful tools that make it all possible. We're talking about computer-assisted audit techniques.
Right, let's just jump straight into the deep end. Picture this. You're an auditor. A huge company hands over its financial records. But it's not a stack of dusty ledgers. Nope, it's a massive server, just humming away, packed with literally billions of transactions. Where do you even start? Seriously, how do you begin to check that for accuracy? This is the massive problem at the heart of auditing any modern company.
And this leads us to what some people call the impossible audit problem. I mean, in today's world, everything's digital, everything's instant. The sheer volume of data makes the old school way of doing things, manually checking paper trails, it's not just hard, it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah, we're talking about a scale that just completely steamrolls the traditional methods. Think about it. Trying to manually check even a tiny fraction of all this data would take forever and cost an absolute fortune. It's just not a real option anymore if you want to be sure the numbers are right.
So what do? Well, if the problem is digital, it kind of makes sense that the solution has to be digital too. And this is where it gets really interesting. We're going to start using computers to audit other computers. And that brings us to the key concept for today, CAATs. That stands for Computer-Assisted Audit Techniques. It's really just the official name for all the specialized methods and software that auditors use to dig into, test, and verify these super complex digital systems. It's kind of like using technology to fight fire with fire. Now, an auditor can't just decide to use these tools on a whim. There's a whole checklist of things they have to think about. They have to ask, is manual testing even remotely possible here? Is this going to be cost-effective? Do we actually have the time? And can we even get access to the client's systems? And probably the most important question, does our team have the tech skills to pull this off without breaking something?
All right, so let's pop the hood and take a look inside the auditor's digital toolkit. We're going to start with the biggest and most important category, audit software itself.
You can really think of audit software as the main workhorse for any modern auditor. It's kind of like a super-powered spell checker, but instead of scanning a document for typos, it's scanning a company's entire financial universe for errors, fraud, and all sorts of anomalies. So within that software category, you've got a few different flavors. First up, you have packaged programs. This is basically your off-the-shelf, general-purpose software. It's not custom-made for anyone in particular, but it's great at handling all the common stuff, like pulling random samples for testing or checking for missing invoice numbers in a sequence. Then you have the total opposite, purpose-written programs. These are custom jobs built from the ground up for one specific client and one specific problem. Like, imagine a company has some really weird, complex way of calculating their cost of sales. An auditor might actually build a unique piece of software just to test that one single calculation. Pretty cool, right?
And finally, there are inquire programs. And this approach is, well, it's really clever. Instead of bringing in their own software, auditors can sometimes use or adapt programs that are already built into the client's own system. For example, they might use the company's internal reporting tool to pull data on employee turnover to help them check the payroll. It's about using the tools you've already got.
Okay, so looking at the data that's already there is one thing. But what about the system itself? How do you know if it's actually working right? Is it set up to catch errors before they become big problems? Well, for that, auditors turn to something called dummy data.
And the technique is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Auditors will create a bunch of fake transactions, the dummy data, and they'll feed it into the client's system. They're basically poking the system to see how it reacts. Will it flag the errors? Will it process the good data correctly? That's what they need to find out. And it's a really methodical four-step process. First, the auditor cooks up this test data, mixing in perfectly normal entries with some deliberately bad ones. Second, they write down exactly how the system should react to every single piece of that data. Third, they run their test on a copy of the client's live program. You don't want to do this on the real thing. And then, step 4, the most important part, they compare what actually happened to what they predicted would happen.
And what's so cool about this is you get to see the kinds of tricky questions these tests are designed to answer. Auditors will throw all sorts of curveballs at the system. They'll create fake sales to customers that don't exist, or they'll try to push an account way over its credit limit, all just to see if the system's defenses are actually working.
This right here, this is the moment of truth. On one side, you have what the program was supposed to do.
and on the other, what it really did. Any little difference between those two columns is a potential red flag. It points to a weakness in the company's controls that has to be investigated right away.
So we've seen what these tools are and how they're used, but like any really powerful piece of technology, they're not a magic bullet. They come with their own distinct set of pros and cons. Let's break down the trade-offs here. On the one hand, the advantages are massive. Auditors get independent access to the data, they can test the reliability of the client's own software, and they can get a much more accurate result. But on the other hand, the downsides are pretty significant too. Getting this stuff set up is expensive and it takes a lot of time. You might run into compatibility issues, and you absolutely need people with serious IT skills to run it. Plus, there's always that small but very real risk that you could mess up or even corrupt the client's data if you're not careful.
And believe it or not, everything we've talked about is really just scratching the surface. The tech is always evolving. There are even more advanced tools out there, like embedded audit software, which basically acts like a permanent watchdog that lives inside a client's system all year long, monitoring transactions as they happen in real time. This is the really high-tech stuff that you usually only see at the biggest firms with the deepest pockets.
At the end of the day, it all boils down to one single massive takeaway. In an economy that is built from the ground up on digital transactions, these computer-assisted techniques, they're not just a nice-to-have extra anymore. They are absolutely fundamental to the machinery that creates trust in our financial system.
And that leaves us with one final and kind of provocative thought to chew on. As these incredibly powerful digital auditing tools become more and more common, it raises a brand new question. In a world that runs on data, who audits the auditors? How do we make sure the audit itself is trustworthy?